After a trend break in the 992 Carrera market, prices continue to slide down at a rapid pace, causing further losses for owners.
In this video I show you exactly how bad the situation is, what you should consider if you're a value-conscious buyer, and if this shift in depreciation pattern also applies to other generations.
As always on this channel, we'll take a data-driven approach. We'll analyze the latest price developments, compare the different generations to each other and to the rest of the market.
We'll start with the star of the show, the 992.1 generation. Let's rewind the clock a little bit before looking at the latest price developments.
After the pandemic price surge, the general car market corrected, and so did the 992.1 market. Prices declined by an average rate of 10% during 2022. But while other markets mostly continued to fall, 992.1 Carrera prices remained relatively stable. They lost 0.5%, while the average depreciation rate in the market was 7.1%.
Depreciation seemed dead. I even made a video with that title.
Yet, we could already see that 992 Carrera started to sell slower and speculated that the downside price risk increased.
The price stability in that market was truly remarkable, but a further decline was unavoidable.
In the summer of 24, prices made new lows, and by the end of the year, the price trend broke. It was clear that we reached the end of stable prices and that more price declines were ahead.
Now that we're well into 2025, we can see that the depreciation rate increased even further, resulting in sliding prices. The decline was more than just a winter dip.
Over here we have the price trends for the base and S Carrera 2 models. Looking at the most recent developments, we can see the continuation of the decline. Last year, prices dropped by 7.4% in the base market and by 8.3% in the S market. In monetary numbers, this amounts to $9.6 and $10.1 thousand.
Now these depreciation rates are averages, so some cars lost a bit more and others a little bit less.
If we break down the base market by model year, we can see that 2020 cars lost only 4% and 2023 cars 9%. This makes sense, right? Since cars depreciate the fastest when they're new. All of the numbers are, by the way, before inflation adjustment.
Let's go now back to the high-level graph and include the German market as well.
We can namely see a similar decline as in the US. I don't have as much historical data as for the US, but it's clear that the short-term trend is pointing down. S models lost 10.4% and base models 6.3%. These drops amount to 14.4 and 8.3 thousand euros. Note though that the German market trend is displayed in euros and the US one in dollars. In the GTS and T market in the US, the flattening isn't as pronounced as in the base and S markets. Yet, also the GTSs and Ts are declining. We can see that GTSs are down by 4.3% compared to last year, and Ts by 9.6%. Compared to the base and S models, these markets are much smaller, so there's a bit more uncertainty in the numbers. Adding the German market to this, we can see somewhat similar numbers. GTSs lost 5% and the Ts 15.7%.
So we know now that the 992.1 market continues to decline, but by itself, this doesn't provide too much information. There are still some important questions.
How bad is the situation actually? What does this mean for value-conscious buyers? And does it apply to other generations as well? Before we answer those questions, I would like to get your attention for today's video sponsor. One of the most horrific and expensive sounds in the automotive world is the sound of your bumper scraping over the tarmac. It can happen to anyone. Speed bumps, potholes, and steep inclines are everywhere these days.
To protect your car from these dangers, you can install the latest in skid plate technology from Exclusive Motorworks.
This isn't just any skid plate. The Automod skid plates from Exclusive Motorworks are the thinnest on the market and require no drilling, screws or rivets to attach. Each skid plate is designed by 3D laser scanning individual vehicle models to ensure that every skid plate is custom fitted. The skid plate kit comes with pre-applied double-sided 3M VHB tape, making the installation a piece of cake. No drilling or screwing required. You can order a skid plate for your car at exclusivemotorworks.com.
Let's go back to the 992 Carrera market and assess how bad the situation is.
First we'll dive into the inventory data and then benchmark the result to the rest of the market. Over here we have the carried over inventory percentage. This is the percentage of cars that aren't sold in 3 months. The higher the number, the longer it takes for a car to sell. There are some exceptions, but in general higher numbers apply to weaker markets. We can see that the carried over inventory rate has been increasing slightly in the beginning of 2024, indicating a minor increase in weakness. Yet, with rates of 22 and 24% of cars that aren't sold within 3 months, the Carreras are still turning over quicker than most other cars. The average sits at approximately 30%, and some cars see numbers as high as 70%.
This number though tells only part of the story. Cars can sell, for example, extremely quickly if they're heavily discounted.
But this isn't the case for the Carreras. Over here we see the price change for the cars that aren't sold within 3 months. This shows that discount rates were the lowest after the pandemic market top, when the complete market corrected, but fluctuated ever since. Typically, there is some seasonality in these rates. Looking at the latest developments, we can see that the rate sits at -2 and -3%, so approximately at the same level as last year.
So far things don't seem to be too bad. But what happens if we compare the Carrera to the rest of the market?
Over here we have the US year-over-year price changes for almost all cars that feature on my channel. On the horizontal axis we have the price changes compared to last year in percentages, and on the vertical axis we have the number of cars to which this change applies. The average decrease during last year was 4%, and most cars lost between 8 and 1%. The base, S, GTS and T 9 and 2.1 Carreras lost on average 7.4% during last year. This is more than the average, and the S and T models just made it to the top 25% of cars that have the highest depreciation rate.
However, also this isn't a bad result.
You see, the 9 and 2.1 Carreras are on average only 3 years old, while most cars in the sample are 7 years old. So it can be expected that 9 and 2.1s lost more than the average.
So how bad is the situation in the 9 and 2.1 Carrera market? Well, the market is clearly weaker than 1 year ago, but the recent continuation of the price decline is nothing out of the ordinary.
In fact, I think it's fair to say that the price stability during 2023 and the beginning of 2024 is extraordinary and more unique than the recent developments.
The data shows that the current falling prices are in line with a more normal depreciation pattern. Prices are declining, not plummeting.
The 9 and 2.1 is depreciating at the moment quicker than the average, yet this is to be expected. It's a relatively new model. However, the market is still relatively strong as the models are still selling quicker than the average. Moreover, discount rates on unsold cars are relatively stable.
Now, provided you're a value-conscious buyer, what do you do with this information?
First, you can ignore all of this and buy an almost brand new 9 and 2. You of course will lose money on it, but the market is not crashing at the moment. There are cars that lose far more. Second, from a value perspective, it makes sense to go for the oldest model year. We saw that there are significant differences between the 2020 cars and the latest ones. Third, if you want to be on the safe side, you can go for an older generation.
Let's have a look at the 991s, 997s and 996s. We'll cover them rather quickly because those markets are fairly stable or are declining at low rates.
Starting with the 991.2 US market, we can see that trends have been stable since mid-23. During the last 3 months, the market weakened slightly, but the price changes compared to last year are still low. SS lost 4.2%, base models 3.3%, and GTS is 0.2%. Out of these changes, only the one of the S model is statistically confirmed, meaning that it's unlikely that this drop is the result of chance. The T market isn't displayed here, but the behavior is similar to the base and S market. If we convert the stuff to euros and add the German market, it becomes a bit cluttered, but it's nice to see them together. It also shows that the German rates are slightly higher. Base models lost 5.5%, GTS is 5.7%, and S is 4.2%. Continuing with the 9 and 1.1, we can see much of the same. Prices have been relatively stable. Base models are up by 0.3%, S's by 0.9%, and GTS's by 4%. Only this latter change is on the border of being statistically confirmed. We can see a bit of weakness in the base market, and this results from a price decrease for high mileage examples, so the ones with more than 45,000 miles. Adding the German market to this and converting the trends to euros, we can see that prices were fairly stable. S's lost 0.2%, and GTSs gained 0.5%. Naturally, these changes aren't statistically confirmed. The base market decreased a bit in the beginning of last year, but recently flattened, resulting in a drop of 6%.
And that brings us to the 997s and 996s.
997.2 prices have been, as you probably expected, quite strong. Base models are up by 1.3% and S's are down by 2.2%. The price increase displayed by the GTSs is unreliable due to the small market size. There are only 2 cars that pushed prices up. So instead of looking at the change over here, I would use the average of the base and the S models as a proxy. All changes are, by the way, not statistically confirmed. In the German market we can see a bit more weakness. GTSs decreased by 2.7%, S's by 6.5% and base models by 3.6%. We can also see that the price differences between the base and S models is much smaller than in the US. The average mileage is also significantly higher in Germany. Moving on to the 997.1 generation in the US, we can see that the market didn't change. Base models are up by 0.1% and S's are down by 1.6%. None of these are confirmed changes. The same applies to the German market, in which base models increased by 0.5% and S's lost 1.1%. Markets don't get much more stable than this. The 996 generation displayed stable prices for a long time. Recently though, the market weakened a bit. Over here you can see a split between the .1 and .2 base and S models, but the .2 S models only include the 4 S's. That split isn't displayed because I don't want to split the base models by the drive wheel configuration. Looking at the most recent developments, we can see that .1 base models decreased by 1.6%, 4 S's by 8.3% and .2 base models by 6%. The drop in the .2 generation is a significant deviation from the stability that we saw before. The price changes though aren't significantly confirmed. In the .2 market, for example, prices increased slightly for the low mileage cars, but decreased for the high mileage cars. This isn't uncommon for markets that are at the end of their depreciation curve, so I think it's definitely worthwhile to monitor these trends a bit closer, as it seems that some shifts are happening after years of stability. Adding the German market to this and converting everything to euros, we can see a 1.6% increase in the .2 market, a 5.8% decline in the .1 base market, and a 6.2% decline in the .2 base market. We don't have as much context as for the US, so it's a bit more difficult to interpret the numbers. Contrary to the US, for example, we can see that it are the low mileage examples with less than 80,000 kilometers in the .2 base market that pushed prices down.
Are you still with me after all of those numbers? Let's have a look at the overview.
Over here we have the aggregate rates for the US and Germany, sorted by the US rates. We can see that the 992.1s indeed lost the most, and that, generally speaking, the older generations are a smarter choice from a value perspective. Especially the 997 and 991s seem solid alternatives. Within the 991 generation, we saw that it are the .1s which depreciated the least. Both the 997 and 991s didn't only depreciate significantly slower than the 992s, they also lost less than the market average of 4%, making them excellent choices from a value perspective. Now it's a bit of a surprise that the 996 generation ranks this high. It's mainly driven by the .2 generation and forms a significant shift from the price stability that we saw during the past few years. It's worthwhile to monitor these developments. Finally, we can see that the rates in Germany tend to be slightly higher, but it's more difficult to interpret these differences at the moment because we don't have so much price history for the German market.
Let's wrap up and conclude. We saw that 992.1 prices continue to drop. The market is clearly weaker than last year, but the current depreciation rate is nothing out of the ordinary for this type of car. What could this mean for value-conscious buyers?
You can of course ignore all of this and buy an almost brand new 992.1. Naturally, you'll lose money, but there are cars that lose far more. Second, from a value perspective, it makes sense to go for the oldest model year. We saw that there are significant differences between the 2020 and the latest ones. Third, if you want to be on the safe side, you can go for an older generation. 997s and 991s, especially the 991.1s, are depreciating at low rates and lose less than the market average.
And with that, we arrived at the end of the video. Now in this Carrera market update, we focused a bit more on the 9 and 2.1 generation. So in the next update, I'll focus on a different generation. This is also the second Porsche video in a row. So in the next video, we'll cover a different brand. Now if you can't wait and already want to have a look at some market analysis for other brands, then you need to have a look at my channel. Over there you'll find data-driven market updates for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of the car down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks for a fresh market update.